So we're going to get our first conference panel session started. And I want to welcome you to that. It's called Leadership in Time of Crisis. Now, of course, we don't really have to mention what crisis we're talking about. It's been with us for at least 15 months and longer in places like China and nations bordering that nation. And yet, as we look back at it from what we hope is its concluding chapter, the pandemic is not just a public health crisis. It's been a time that has showed the privileged among us just how deep economic and social inequities go between those who can work safely from home, for instance, versus those who cannot. It's also been a time of tremendous acceleration, bringing about in a matter of weeks the kind of major changes in work, in business processes, in daily life that would normally take years or decades. So in the next 40 minutes, we're going to look at all those facets of the pandemic in our communities with the help of leaders who were elected without knowing it to steer their cities through the worst of times. Joining us live is Mayor Fred Eisenberger of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, known to his constituents as Mayor Fred. ICF named that community, Hamilton, as one of its top 7 intelligent communities in 2018. And it's a city of over 500,000 people, located in the center of a region known as the Golden Horseshoe at the westernmost end of Lake Ontario, some 70 kilometers southwest of Toronto. It was once known as Canada's steel town, producing more than half of the nation's steel, but the sharp decline of that industry's employment has left the city to chart a very different course that drew on the lessons of the ICF method. From high-quality broadband to a revolution in education, from partnerships that drive innovation to a serious and sustained effort to lift up people who are stranded by industrial decline, I think Hamilton is a model for mid-sized cities that are eager to build a better future. You can learn more about it and other intelligent communities on the Intelligent Community Networks pages of our website. Mayor Eisenberger was born in Amsterdam, but moved to Hamilton with his family when he was 8. And he served as mayor from 2006 to 2010, and then made successful runs for office in 2014 and 2018. And thinking about those dates, you have to wonder if he isn't a glutton for punishment. First, the global financial crisis that kicked off in 2008, and then the pandemic starting in 2020. Mayor Fred, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, I mean, if I look back on it, it's been the best of times and it's been the worst of times. And you know what, you sign on to do the work and work the files and make sure that you put your community in a position to succeed. And I still feel that way. I'm still very optimistic about the future. I feel very positive about how we're coming out of this pandemic. And certainly, you know, our role is providing opportunities in our community and working through, you know, our 30-year challenge in terms of diversifying our economy, I think has made Hamiltonians actually very resilient. I think our staff has been very resilient. We're not unaccustomed to these challenges, although the pandemic has been certainly one of the most significant ones in our collective lifetime. But I'm very proud of the resilience of our citizens and our staff, and you know, we're coming out of it, I think, in a very positive way. I think we're scheduled to have something like 6% growth. They're considered to be one of the leading mid-sized cities in North America. It's just named through the Foreign Direct Investment magazine. So we're well positioned to come out of this with, I think, some momentum.
Well, good for you. I remember I visited Hamilton in 2018 in that top 7 year. And I remember, I'm just interested that you used the word resilience, because I recall from my report using that word multiple times. It's in the spirit of the community before we got there. But before we keep speaking, I want to reach back actually to last May, to an interview that we recorded with Mayor Alan Thompson. Now, he's the mayor of Caledon, which is a small rural community in the Peel region of Ontario, Canada, to the north of you. And at that time, he was also chair of the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, which advocates for and provides leadership for more than 400 small municipalities across the province. So I asked Mayor Thompson to talk about the challenges of leading a community in a crisis. And here's what he had to say.
This has been a very tough one because it's everybody's life. As the safety of your municipality, the safety of your people, you wear a huge responsibility. It's heavy, and I'm going to tell you the decisions you have to make and the timeliness. And I'll tell you one thing: you have to move quickly. You have to do your homework. I think really through this past 50 days, if you ask me, I'm probably more mentally drained than I've ever experienced. And it's because you're trying to make sure you're making the right decision with the good science that you have available for you to work with, and to move and be nimble. And I have to say, the staff that I have been working with, I am so blessed. They were so understanding, willing to make those changes and shifts. And I could tell you over 4 days, we had rechanged our direction about 8 or 9 times, never complained once. We all knew our feet are on the ground, and it was delivering to keep our people safe, our families safe. And I think that was a key focus.
Well, I think you said it well. Mayor Fred, so that's how it was back in May in Caledon. And watching that, I was thinking he's exhausted after his first 50 days. Whew, he's got a lot more days ahead of him. What has the past 15 months been like for you in your role as the elected leader of Hamilton?
You know, what comes to mind is that great Friends episode where they're carrying the couch up the stairs and it's pivot. We've been pivoting basically for a year and a half. All the different variants and all the different curves that have been thrown at all communities has caused us to continuously pivot in different directions and be nimble enough and certainly experienced enough in terms of the team to be able to do that effectively. And so we early on had a very strong emergency operations center team, including public health, fire department, the police, all the major institutions were part of that to kind of help us work through kind of the public health issues that we were dealing with. And be it not for the great leadership of 2 of our leaders, Paul Johnson and Dr. Elizabeth Richardson, who was our medical officer of health, both of them identified as Distinguished Citizens of the Year for their work throughout this process, and they're great teams. We would have been in very, very challenging circumstances over and above the challenging circumstances we were already in. So for us, and for me, it's about communicate. It was really about telling people what was going on, being totally brutally honest with people, letting them know what they should and should not do, hopefully getting compliance, requiring enforcement, through our bylaw officers and police in a kind of a way that we could never have imagined ourselves doing, 2 years ago. And so it has been challenging. It's been second guessing from a lot of people in terms of our leadership on these issues. Everyone's got an opinion, and electricians are trying to tell epidemiologists how to epidemiology. Everyone's got an opinion. And so trying to work through all of that and staying focused on what the best course of action was, notwithstanding all the other information coming at us, was the biggest challenge going forward. And I think we did that quite successfully. I can tell you, though, the isolation that we all have felt has certainly been felt by me, that, you're, as mayor, you're accustomed to going to dinners, on 2 or 3 per evening, maybe 5 times a week, a couple of events on the weekend where you can talk to people that aren't annoyed, that are, happy to be in a place and celebrating some great fundraising event or some ethnic opportunity. All we were able to hear from during this last year and a half were pretty much social media, angry, critical individuals. So I'm really yearning for a rubber chicken dinner where I can get together with the folks in the broader community and hear their thoughts. And, and we've had a little bit of that in the last little while. And it is very reaffirming that, by and large, people believe that, all levels of government have done a pretty darn good job of getting us through this process. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done. Has it been exhausting? So not physically exhausting, but mentally exhausting, as the mayor of Caledon pointed out. You didn't think it was affecting you, and then at a given point in time, you just bonked for a couple of days. I think that was an experience for a lot of people in leadership, and certainly a lot of people in the broader community that were trying to keep their lives together. So it's the beauty is it's been a shared experience. None of us are alone in this globally. I mean, when in our collective time have we had one issue that captivated the entire globe at the same time, in the same way, with, unfortunately different impacts based on, whatever our kind of economic status was. But it has been a global experience, and in some respects, hopefully will be a unifying experience that will bring us all closer together as a community and as a global environment.
Well, I certainly hope so. And yes, it's, yeah, that's a wonderful way to look at it, actually. Thank you. So let's just talk for a minute about sort of what happened. I mean, again, thinking about those 15 months, what are some of the things that you're proudest of about Hamilton's response to that crisis, whether it's from local government to businesses to just people at home doing what they need to do?
Yeah, we did see a coming together of, all the major institutions. And, one of the hallmarks of our effort to get out of the kind of 30-year decline or the 30-year clawback to, diversity in our economy has meant that we've had to collaborate with major institutions in our community. And that collaboration has served us so exceptionally well. And it really got elevated even more through the pandemic. We needed to work together. We needed to have consistent messaging, and that messages on all of the platforms out there can get very jumbled and very confusing. So it was critically important that our major institutions were on the same page, heading in the same direction, and kind of working on the same song sheet. So that was I think an outcome that really spoke to the kind of preparatory work that we had done on that whole collaboration piece. Had we not had that, it might have been very, very difficult for us to maintain some level of consistency and help our community get through this process. But again, I'll turn to the overall resilience of our citizens who by and large basically did what we asked them to do. I mean, when in our lifetime have we asked everybody to stay home? And then not only legislated it, but also enforced it. And that was something that the vast majority of our population accepted because they understood that the need was there. They understood the communications that we were delivering to them. They understood that we were telling them what was happening in our community that they needed to be concerned about. And we had, thankfully, a federal government and provincial government that stepped up in a big way to fill the gaps that needed to be filled, or else chaos would have ensued. And so that level of collaboration also elevated in a much more significant way. So I would say I think that the proudest moment from all of this was the level of collaboration on the local level, and the level of collaboration between the federal, provincial, and municipal governments. If we didn't have any of that, we would be in a much, much more dire circumstance today.
Well, as you know, ICF talks a lot about collaborative leadership. It's funny how often it comes up, but we've been talking about resilience, right? And I just jotted down the note that collaboration is resilience. It's the foundation of it. You can't actually succeed as a community or really as much else until you achieve that kind of trusted collaboration that goes on. So kudos on that. In May, I also spoke with Mayor Mark Jamieson of the intelligent community of Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, which is just as nice as it sounds. A two-time top 7 intelligent community, Sunshine Coast is a metropolitan area that spreads across 2,000 square kilometers of Australia's coastline. Its natural beauty, its great weather, and relaxed lifestyles have made it a real destination for both tourists and retirees, which has led to a population boom. But that's really not enough to build sustained prosperity for the majority of its residents, as most tourist places know. So the city has adopted the ICF method to accelerate broadband deployment, to drive education and quality employment for young people, and to turn that tourist town into an innovation and an entrepreneurial hub for the state of Queensland. Mayor Jamieson was elected to his position in 2012 and has served continuously since then after an executive career in media and publishing. He also represents his council as president of the Local Government Association of Queensland. Let's hear what he has to say again from May of last year about how Sunshine Coast adapted to the demands of the pandemic.
Yeah, look, we have a local disaster management group that reports through to a district disaster management group and then ultimately to the State of Queensland Disaster Management Coordination Group that's chaired by our Premier. And I'm the chair of the Sunshine Coast Local Disaster Management Group. And we run a lot of simulations and planning around all sorts of challenges. More often than not, they're to do with natural disasters like cyclones or serious flooding or fires, or maybe even major traffic or rail accidents with highly dangerous chemicals and the like. But we have had a pandemic plan, and that did serve us well. It meant we were quickly able to adjust and put necessary warnings in place, obviously taking advice from our national cabinet, which is a combination of the Prime Minister and the state premiers, and the Chief Executive Officer of Queensland Health, who also provided a lot of regular updates and support. So as a consequence of that, we were able to move very quickly, and I think the limited number of infections is a clear demonstration that what we've put in place has been very successful. We established ourselves early on as the reliable and trusted voice of the community, and the traditional media have been very supportive of that, and the online and social media have generally been very supportive of that as well. You'll always get people who think there's a better way or another way, or it should happen faster or slower. But in the main, I've got to congratulate our citizens on the very sensible approach they've taken. But we're a major tourism destination, and it's very unusual that we would discourage people from visiting us. But we've had to do that, but at the same time keep faith with our own citizens that if they adhere to the health issues, and particularly the social distancing, then they can go about their life and still enjoy things like a walk on the beach, as long as they don't get too close. And that has been very well received by our local citizens, and I'm sure we'll look forward to receiving our valuable tourists again into the future when this is all behind us. As people have realised that we can't get together, so what other facilities are available for us? And whilst many of these programs have been available for a long time, this has really given people a sense of urgency around upgrading their skills. Clearly, lots of people have been working from home, and I guess we're still to assess perhaps the efficiency rate of some of those things, but it certainly has meant that people have felt safer, particularly council employees who we regard as the guardians of our community, but they live and breathe like everybody else, and therefore are also at risk of the infection. So I've been very, very happy with the way in which our community's responded.
I find it very interesting that the echoes between what you've said, Mayor Fred, and what we just heard. Preparedness, having a plan is kind of an interesting thing. And one of the questions, of course, we're all going to be asking ourselves is, what's the plan for the next one of these things? That trusted voice thing. How I'm sure you thought very deeply about this, you and your team. How did you establish and maintain that trust during this time when there's so much misinformation and there's so many people with their own opinions, as you said?
First of all, let me acknowledge that my son went to the University of the Sunshine Coast.
All right.
Just outside of Brisbane, got his teaching degree. I said at the time that I saw beaches, beer, and blondes, and not a lot of books. But he did graduate and had a wonderful time on the Sunshine Coast. So great place. Just in to mirror the mayor's comments, we have a well-developed emergency operations plan that started some 20 years ago to deal with any calamities in our community. So that is rehearsed and trained annually, almost monthly, for any kind of emergency. And so that was a pretty quick run up to getting prepared for what we at the time didn't realize was going to be a year and a half. And I think we could all admit that at the very beginning, it was, well, you know, a couple of weeks, a month, we'll shut down, and then this issue will be behind us. And once we got into it and came to realize that this is going to be a longer term issue, it really started to bring in a lot more need to you know, have a longer kind of preparedness window throughout all of this. So I would say you know, the resilience that we've seen in our staff has been quite amazing. Having a plan was critically important. In the absence of that, it would have been a very scattered approach. You know, the values that we kind of cherish in a community in terms of that resilience that we talked about just came out very, very effectively throughout this entire process. Now, keeping people engaged and informed was really the only way that we could encourage people to see us as a trusted voice. You know, that we're not in a day and age where there is a lot of trust in government voices, but you know, you trade on, you know, what does the majority of the population feel like? And certainly we had a lot of feelers out there that people were adhering to the recommendations we were making. People understood why they were being made. If there had not been a stronger support network, which I think was pretty strong in Canada in terms of helping people financially through these challenges, whether it was businesses or individuals, you know, that would have been a very undermining effect. That would have caused a lot of chaos and certainly a lot more anxiety than there needed to be. So that collective effort to try and keep people whole, keep people engaged, and if they weren't employed, keep them financially whole to the best degree possible, not have them evicted out of their apartments or their living units, trying to keep those businesses you know, in place to the best degree possible. All of that effort, I think, gave the government as a whole that trusted voice that said, we know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it. We know what would happen if we didn't do it, and that kind of information was shared with the broader community. So I think by and large, and you know, these days never perfect. There is also always anti-voices. There's always the opposing party, the anti-vaxxers, the folks that put stuff on social media pretending to be experts. Our message consistently was, go to the trusted sources, go to the experts in terms of epidemiology, go to the experts in terms of vaccination, go to the government websites, go to the municipal websites, go to the federal websites, where all of the expertise lies that actually understands and appreciates what's actually happening in our community, that those are the voices you should be listening to. You know, and I had, you know, one of my in-laws tell me that they weren't going to take the vaccine because their electrician's son in the United States said it wasn't a good idea. And I said to them, so the next time you get sick, you're going to call your plumber. And, you know, and that's the kind of stuff that we dealt with on the negative voices, is people pretending to have vast expertise to suggest to people that this vaccine is not credible, the vaccine is not effective, it's going to harm you in some sort of way. You know, all of it, I think, you know, considered not to be true, but, you know, some people in our community are, you know, expressing those voices. And the outcome of that is still something that we're going to be dealing with, because the vaccination, you know, resistance in 20% of the population is going to be an ongoing issue going forward, because we literally need the vast majority of our population vaccinated. And so that resistance against vaccination and that kind of underlying negative message is something that we're still going to be combating as we're vaccinating more and more people every day.
You know, I think that's a very important thing for us all to keep in mind. It ain't over till it's over. When I was last in Hamilton in 2018, the city was somewhere midway through a remarkable economic transition that brought together business, education, government as real partners. And then you got the pandemic. Now, coming out of that, you've talked about the fact that you're seeing some real growth there. What do you expect the next few years in terms of that economic transition, which you've called the diversification of the economy?
You know, Robert, it has been a surprise to, I think, everyone that over the last year and a half, we've seen more development applications come through, more economic opportunity at our airport, at our waterfront port, on the waterfront lands, former industrial lands, all of them, employment opportunities going forward in a very significant way. So it has actually accelerated the opportunities for the next growth area of our city, including the recent announcement around the LRT, which couldn't come at a better time in terms of economic
just to be specific, light rail
transit. Thank you. That's been on the books, for the city of Hamilton for the past 12 years, on again, off again, on again, by virtue of government change, or they didn't want to fund, and then they did want to fund, and now we're back to both levels of governments agreeing to fully fund an LRT line that runs through the center of our city. That is in part public transportation, which of course is important, but more about the economic renewal, commercial and residential renewal along the corridor that will occur, that whole corridor is ripe for. And that really speaks to not only employment opportunities to build the LRT, but future residential construction development, commercial development, new business opportunities all the way along the corridor. So add that to the Amazon fulfillment center coming at our airport, and our airport has been and continues to be one of the largest distribution centers in the country, and distribution through the pandemic has been booming. A lot of the PPEs, personal protective equipment, a lot of the vaccines have been coming through our Hamilton International Airport and then being dispersed throughout the rest of the country. So that growth has actually spurred on DHL to expand in a significant way. It has spurred on Amazon to create their fulfillment center, and more of that is coming in terms of distribution. So the opportunities have not abated at all. In fact, they've accelerated. But we've also had decline in the restaurant industry. We've had decline in retail. We've had decline in the not-for-profit sector. And so we actually brought all of those sectors together to create the Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery, and started to kind of fashion new policies and new directions that would help them not only through the pandemic, but coming out of the pandemic. So some 103 recommendations came out of that. A lot of them are, policy changes that would expedite approvals, to, actual look at what kind of economic circumstances do people find themselves in, and how can we look at different ways of dealing with that through this pandemic. And a lot of that's been amplified through this pandemic. So in my view, I'm hoping that our government comes to realize that for all intents and purposes, they've been delivering guaranteed basic income. It is now, amplified the very important circumstances in terms of poverty and homelessness, and the circumstances that far too many people find themselves in. And I think it's one way to actually reduce the cost of the overall impact of poverty and homelessness, and provide stable income and housing platforms for individuals in our community. So I'm hoping coming out of this, that there's a realization that some of the negatives that have been amplified will get a much greater attention and much greater resources to help us through, including, what we found in underpaid, working at the margins, long-term care facilities. All of those have been very amplified issues that if we fail to address them coming out of this pandemic, then the lessons learned from it will have been wasted. And you know what? You should never waste a crisis.
Exactly. If we don't deal with these things, shame on us. In April of 2020, so that's 1 month before the May that we've been hearing about, as the U.S. was just coming to terms with the pandemic, I had a chance to interview Mayor Rusty Bailey of Riverside, California, which was ICF's 2012 Intelligent Community of the Year. And Riverside is located in the desert some 60 miles outside Los Angeles. Before it started the work that won our top award, Riverside was a bedroom community. It was a university town. It was the center of a farming region and a warehouse hub. In the transformation that began in 2004, it took those assets and supercharged them by connecting business to universities, launching startup accelerators, installing a free citywide wireless network, and creating one of the most innovative digital inclusion programs in the world. Now, Mayor Bailey is a Riverside native who worked for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and county government, taught high school, and also served on city council before serving 2 terms as mayor beginning in 2012. So let's listen to the lessons he was taking away from the early days, this is April again, of the pandemic.
So we instituted the city 50% occupancy standards, you know, for social distancing purposes. I think New York City did the same thing. And then the next day, the county said, shut it all down. And restaurants were included. You know, we did bars and nightclubs and those types of things, trying to keep restaurants open so that they could, you know, provide food. We heard from grocers that, you know, 50% of caloric intake is through restaurants, 50% through grocery store. So if you're taking away 50% of the caloric intake across the society, that might be good, you know, ultimately for people that cut down on their caloric intake, but immediately that was going to push people to grocery stores, which was going to put a burden on them and potentially have situations, altercations, a run on things like we saw with toilet paper. So, you know, we fiddled around with that, to tell you the truth, for the first couple days of that, looking at responding, and the county was basically, you know, in charge, obviously, through the public health department. And the state hadn't come down and provided, you know, immediate guidance. So the Bay Area shut down. The Bay Area, boom, they were down maybe a week or so before the rest of us. And you can see that their curve really flattened. And so, you know, that's the only thing that I can think of looking back that we probably should have done. Like I said, the military, they would have just, you know, boom, nobody's leaving base. Nobody's leaving post. You know, you're not getting off the ship. And maybe we should have done that in the future. I think that's going to be anytime there's a flare up anywhere in the world, we're just going to immediately shut down, isolate, and stave it off, you know, that first month, and we wouldn't maybe have some of the outbreaks that we did.
So, Mayor Fred, are there things that you think the city should have done differently or would have done differently if, in the pandemic, if you knew then what you know now?
Well, that's an interesting question, and and my answer to that is probably not. You know, I think we managed the pandemic under kind of the EOC kind of edict, emergency operations kind of edict, with very strong public health recommendations, and you know, most of the flux that was happening at the federal and provincial levels, and so we kind of tied ourselves to, you know, reacting to the pandemic based on the science. And I know it would have been very, very easy to get political about this and tell people what they'd like to hear, which is, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Just go about your everyday business, because, you know, most of us would like that to happen. But the reality is that those were not the circumstances we found ourselves in. And hard decisions had to be made. And so to the mayor's point, you know, there may have been times where we, as a country and as a province, we could have reacted quicker to contain the issue. I don't think anybody really understood how virulent this virus was early on, and we may have had the opportunity to contain it early on, but that window closed, you know, unfortunately, fairly quickly. And because we are a very globally connected world today, we can expect and anticipate that more of these kinds of outbreaks are going to happen. And so, are we prepared to make the hard choices now to contain quickly the outbreaks wherever they happen, so that they don't become the global issue that we find ourselves in today? I think that's going to be the central theme for all communities. I think, epidemiologists are going to be very focused on that. I think countries are going to be very focused on that, given the kind of the broad impacts of our global economy has been so adversely impacted. But fortunately, every country in the world has had to support their people in one manner or another. But quicker reaction to an outbreak, I think, is going to be the way to prevent this kind of broad, overarching global expansion of a virus that they're going to be out there. I mean, viruses are not new. Viruses are part of our everyday lives. The question is, how do we contain them and live with them? And certainly this virus is something that we're going to have to get ourselves familiar with. We're not unaccustomed to other viruses that have harmed our societies in the past, whether it was polio or smallpox or measles or all the other ones that we vaccinate against. And so this is going to be a similar issue, but we have never had that kind of global impact where we all experience it at the same time throughout the entire globe. And I think that is a lesson that really speaks to find out where things are happening. So global cooperation and collaboration is going to be critical. And then how that spills down into our smaller communities is going to be how we basically are going to contain these outbreaks. But for our community, I'm not sure that we could have done it any differently. And we're still dealing with it day in and day out. Obviously, vaccine supply. Would we know what virus is coming up next? I think we might be ready for that. But we also have learned how to put together a vaccine quicker than we've ever been able to do in history. And so those are great lessons learned. And I think our readiness for, a future virus is going to be much, much more enhanced.
I remember when the WHO declared this as a global pandemic, I was actually at a conference in Washington, D.C., and I was there with a couple thousand people, and we were all, looking back, it's terrifying. We were all sort of doing pretend protection for each other. We were bumping elbows, and you look back and you think, my God, we had no idea what we were doing. Do you think that one of the things that tends to happen with all disasters is that we do a really great job of saying we're going to make these preparations and so forth and so on, and then some time goes by and other priorities begin to intrude. Have you thought about that? I mean, how do you keep that kind of vigilance going all the time?
Well, I think one of the messages coming out of this that has been a practice in many places around the world, but not so much in North America, is the masking issue. If you think about the very, very low incidence of flu this past flu season, largely predominantly because we've been masking and taking precautions of not necessarily shaking hands with everybody you see, which I love to do, and I'd love to hug everybody, but there's a time and a place for that, and flu season's probably not the right time and place. And so I suspect that masking is going to continue to be something that many people will continue to adhere to, especially if they're in confined spaces and we're in that kind of space. So I think masking is, even from the beginning of this pandemic, where it felt strange and odd and unusual, is now very commonplace, and it's almost becoming rather automatic. So as we leave to go to a retail space that requires masking, we have a mask in our pocket, we're in our car, and we automatically, as we're walking in the door, putting on the mask. And I think that's something that's going to be with us for quite some time. If you look at the Asian countries, they've been doing it for decades, not unusual at all. And so, it's something that's going to be with us. In terms of preparedness, so again, our EOC planning process is something that is an ongoing process that trains for all the potential issues that come at us. I think the playbook for pandemic is now reasonably well written for our community, and certainly we're going to have a kind of a post-mortem after that we're past it all to really refine and tune up that playbook so that the next time it happens, whether I'm here or the next medical officer of health or the next EOC manager can pull that playbook out and say, this is what happened in the last pandemic, and here's what we did well, and here's what we didn't do well. Here's what you should do into the future. And I think that playbook is going to be a very prominent, enhanced document. And I suspect that pandemics are not going to be a stranger to us over the coming decades.
Somebody asked me what I was going to do with all my masks, you know, that like so many people have got a house full of them. And I said, well, I'm just going to save them for the next one because yeah, it's obviously coming. I mean, wasn't that long ago that it was about SARS and MERS, and, you know, this is just a larger version of the same. So I've sometimes in my own mind wondered whether we in the West at some point are going to decide that our colleagues in Taiwan and in China and in so many other Southeast Asian nations really are smart to learn to bow to each other instead of shaking hands, but we'll see.
Well, you know what? I mean, these are adaptations. I mean, right now it's commonplace to elbow. Felt really strange in the very beginning. We're doing slaps of the back of the hand or, you know, pretend shakes. But now, you know, there's an understanding of why it might be valuable, and although, you know, we're social beings, and you know, we like to interact in that way. You like to hug your friends or shake hands with all the folks that you know, and hopefully we can get back to that to you know, a reasonable degree. But I think there's going to be, you know, a lingering and long-lasting caution that people are going to exercise based on this experience. Hopefully, that experience won't be lost on people in future generations.
It is to be hoped. Mayor Fred, I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your experiences and your insights with us. I always learn something new when I have a conversation with you. I don't get to do that often enough, but it's always a privilege. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. Great to be here, and have a great day.
Thank you.